Today on the Playbook Podcast, we've got the latest developments in the Jeffrey Epstein saga. We have an immigration crackdown starting in Chicago, and we've got a special election in Northern Virginia. Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, September 9th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. How you doing, Dasha?
Good morning. This week is already off to quite the start, my friend.
It is only Tuesday, and already we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. The subject that we spent so much of the summer talking about is dominating the conversation in DC again. I'm sure everyone listening to this will be aware that yesterday afternoon, the House Oversight Committee released a tranche of what we are contractually obliged to call the Epstein files, and including this, well, I don't know what the right word for it is really, Dasha, an extraordinary book that was given to Jeffrey Epstein 22 years ago.
Birthday book, yes.
Featuring various messages to him by friends, including one that appears on the face of it to be from Donald Trump, the President of the United States. We knew about its existence from the Wall Street Journal. Trump insists that he didn't write this message, and he's already suing the Wall Street Journal about it. But now we've all seen it with our own eyes, and it was really quite a moment when you first see it, Dasha.
Yeah, and I was watching the various cable networks. CNN read the entire dialogue out loud. I mean, this is the kind of image that Democrats are really hoping will stick in people's minds.
I mean, how could it not, right? I'm sure, again, most people will have read this or seen this by now, but it's really awfully creepy to read the sort of language that is used in this message to Jeffrey Epstein once you know, as we all of course do now, about the horrific crimes Jeffrey Epstein was committing at this time. It's really creepy to read. And the White House's defense continues to be that Donald Trump did not write this. And even though it appears to have his signature at the bottom, that is in fact not his signature. And that is the line that they continued to pursue yesterday and will continue to pursue today as well. Essentially, it's the deny, deny, deny approach that we've heard from Donald Trump over so many issues, over so many years.
Full and complete denial as a response. And the White House, in fact, the spokespeople are using this to say he's actually been vindicated. They're saying it's not his signature. This proves that this was a hoax all along. Of course, it does no such thing. But I will say, in talking to White House officials, they are a lot less deer in headlights about this now than they were some weeks and some months ago when this first became a real problem for them. They feel like this is now, or at least they are trying to say this is now Democrats stirring the pot here. You're not seeing just yet the same amount of MAGA influencer ire online, although that's certainly still the case. And one White House official said, look, you don't right now have mainstream Republicans pushing this. You have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mason, Thomas Massie out there saying, quote, okay, who's listening? But they certainly were not naive, the administration, that when folks came back to town, that this was going to be a problem. And so I think they sort of steeled themselves for this a little bit more than last time. The question is, will this response of saying this is all Democrats trying to stir it up work, or will it continue to take on a life of its own, as we've seen?
Yeah, when this story first went really big earlier in the summer, it definitely wasn't something that was being pushed by Democrats at that stage. In fact, the Democrats were rather late to the party, if I can put it in those rather unseemly terms. It was being pushed by Donald Trump's own supporters who have obsessed over this case for a very, very long time now. And I guess the reason why the White House was more deer in the headlights, as you put it then, was because they knew they had a real problem, because the threat was coming from within their own side. For the first time, there seemed to be this big schism between Donald Trump and his own base. Now it feels like they've kind of got their ducks in a row, in the sense that they've got a line on it. The line is, this is not true. He did not do this, even though we're all looking at evidence in literal black and white.
Well, and importantly, politically, they're also saying this is the mainstream media. This is the Wall Street Journal. This is the Democrats that are doing this to us. Whereas at the beginning, they absolutely couldn't and didn't have that line.
Completely. And legitimately, it was the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee that sort of gleefully released this image on social media yesterday and were putting their own commentary around it. We've heard lots from Democrats saying how outrageous it is that, in their view, Donald Trump would write something like this. And as you say, now that the White House has some sort of defense, it seems that Donald Trump supporters, even the ones who have obsessed about this case for years and almost made careers on the backs of obsessing on it, they're not going for him over this. They are not weighing in and saying, oh my goodness, look at what the president wrote. They seem to be accepting even though the evidence is there in black and white right in front of us all, that they're happy to support the sort of party line.
The White House feels like they have sort of neutralized the threat from within. One White House official told me that the Truth Social that the president put out, saying essentially it's a waste of time for Republicans to be talking about it. It's a distraction from all the work the administration is doing, and don't fall for the Democrats' trap. He put that post out knowing that Republicans on the Hill would read it and that they would listen to him.
And in a sense, they may well be right, in the sense that what really matters then is, how does this land in the eyes of the public? Well, most people have got more immediate things in their lives to obsess about than Jeffrey Epstein's files from 20 years ago, right? People are worried about grocery prices and security and all the things that we know people worry about in their everyday lives. And so maybe the White House is right that they can essentially get away with this, as Donald Trump has got away with so many different discrepancies that might have floored another politician in the past, by just obfuscating and ignoring and denying and pressing on, because they know most people have got bigger fish to fry in their lives. And maybe this will end up being no different to the rest of it.
Yep, that's exactly right.
It's interesting. I was watching Fox News last night, and some of the conservative media, seeing how are they going to cover this? What is their approach going to be? And certainly the sort of Democrat hoax in general terms is a line that you hear people using. But the main thing that conservative media are doing is talking about a completely different case, a much more immediate criminal case, which is the case of Irina Zarutska, the Ukrainian refugee who was murdered last month in Charlotte on a train. And what we're seeing in conservative media is they're very keen to talk about this story instead, which they say, and which Republicans are saying, is a classic example of the sort of crimes that we're seeing in cities, and exactly the sort of thing that Donald Trump is trying to tackle with his big clampdown on crime that he's been pushing since earlier in the summer. And I feel like if you look at the so-called liberal media on one side, the so-called conservative media on the other side, they're both obsessing about two completely different stories.
Right. They're not making different points. They're just on completely different pages and topics.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see that playing out. And we saw Donald Trump talking about this case yesterday. And I suspect we're going to hear an awful lot more about this dreadful case over the next few days, as Donald Trump continues to push this agenda of clamping down on crime in big cities.
It's a horrific video. It's a horrific thing that happened. And this is exactly the kind of thing, though, that politically the president wants to use to put Democrats on the back foot, as he and the White House really feel that crime is going to be one of the defining issues for this president and for the midterms.
Yeah, exactly right. And so we were talking about it on the podcast yesterday, that President Trump is sort of weighing up which city he should target next. Have you got any insight from the White House? Are they still having those deliberations? How are they feeling about it?
One White House official says, we're just looking at the list of cities, and the plan is to really keep setting these traps for Democrats. They feel like right now, some of the sound bites and the images that are coming from Democratic leaders in these states and in these cities are fodder for their own campaign videos. They're already pulling clips, so to speak, to use for candidates and for the midterms. One White House official literally said to me, they are falling right into Trump's trap.
We were sort of expecting Chicago to be next in line. What we did see this week already now is certainly an immigration crackdown in Chicago. And it's easy to conflate the two things here. There are actually, or traditionally used to be, two pretty different things that a government might do, right?
It'd be understandable if you're conflating them, because there is certainly a Venn diagram here, right?
There is a Venn diagram, and there has been intentional conflation going on. There is an immigration crackdown now happening in Chicago. They have a name for it, Operation Midway Blitz. We knew that they were planning to do this because they'd asked one of the local military bases if ICE could use some of their facilities there as a sort of base to do this. And that is now underway in Chicago, Illinois. That is not the same thing as sending in the National Guard, but it may yet become that in Chicago, and we just don't know quite how far they're going to go.
Yeah, and this is something that Tom Homan has been out there championing, and this is really us seeing the beginning of this ramped up deportation operation. You know, I thought that this is something that we'd be talking about earlier in the Trump administration, but it did take some time for legislation to pass and for things to get underway. But you're now seeing the beginnings of this massive, massive campaign promise, not only to close the border, but to deport millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States.
And the White House are pretty happy with how that's playing out too, right? They basically think they're winning on this issue, even though we do see these opinion polls that show support for immigration apparently going up across America, at least according to these polls. Yet in the White House, they're still pretty confident this is a vote-winning issue for them.
Yeah, they're not taking seriously the polls about people not being thrilled with the National Guard coming into various American cities. They just don't think that those polls are accurate, and they feel like they really are on the right side of these issues. One White House official likened the crime and the immigration issues to me to the trans issue, and how Republicans see trans people in sports as an 80-20 issue. They feel like crime and immigration are, again, those issues that are much more popular with Americans than Democrats recognize.
Fascinating to see how they progress with that over the next few days. One other thing to mention that's happening today, an election. We love elections. Dasha, I know you spent half a life covering one.
Oh, yes. Every time I hear that election music, I get a little... get a little crazy.
Well, this isn't quite an election for the President of the United States. This is a special election in the DC suburbs, Northern Virginia.
Can you say bellwether?
I think it's pretty clear that the Democrat candidate is going to win this. Everyone's expecting a guy called James Wilkinshaw. He was chief of staff to the late Jerry Connolly, who's the representative who sadly died earlier in the year. Anyway, the vote is happening today. The reason this is interesting, Dasha, is because it changes the numbers in the House just a little bit. And now normally like one extra Democrat coming into the House of Representatives wouldn't make a massive difference. But when things are this finely poised, it actually does. And there's going to be another special election in a couple of weeks' time when, again, we're expecting Democrats to win. Suddenly they will have a couple of seats back, and those numbers will get closer still. And things like the Thomas Massie petition demanding the release of the Epstein files in full start to get a little bit closer to happening. So weirdly, these normally quite obscure and random little elections can actually be a lot more important to our politics today than they normally would be, because those margins are so fine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why you're seeing all of these redistricting battles across the country. Right. And when I say bellwether, it's, less about what it says for who's going to get elected where, and much more what it says about what might actually be coming in terms of a policy and legislation standpoint.
Before we go, this is an amazing story I just wanted to mention, but really riffing on the back of what we were talking about yesterday with Scott Bessent and that extraordinary near punch-up that
near
we were
UFC
reporting
match.
on. Exactly. There's been another fight involving a senior Republican. Representative Tim Burchett got into some sort of scuffle with a protester in front of the Capitol last week. There's been various reports about what actually happened, saying they got bumped, that we've now seen video, and apparently Burchett taunted the protester and said the words, "Come over here, weenie."
Not weenie.
Which I believe is an American insult. Yeah, it's a new one on me, to be honest, but okay, it doesn't sound very
we're
diplomatic.
talking weenie. What is going on?
What is in the water in DC at the moment, Dasha, where people keep starting fights with each other?
What's happening, you guys? Can someone write in and tell us, is there something in the water? Did we miss something? Is everyone just, the existential rage that's been bubbling up is finally coming out? Like, what? Politics? What are we doing?
I don't get it. I feel pretty chill, but I think I'm the only person in DC who does at the moment. If you've got any ideas or thoughts, you can send them in to playbook@politico.com.
If you have any spotteds of politicians throwing punches, please.
Yeah, right. We're going to have a daily section in the newsletter for them. We have got much more news analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, probably with some more punch-ups, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. But that is all we've got time for today. Dasha, thank you as always for coming along.
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day.